Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and now we'll get back to business after my frustrating absences lately. We're going to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The History of Romanism by John Dowling. We're talking about the life and times of Antichrist Pope Gregory VII. Gregory the Great of the Roman Catholic Church, he was the one who first established the precedent, the papal precedent, which is in effect even today, of being King of Kings. The Pope is the King of Kings in the world. Just like Satan offered Jesus in his temptations 40 days, he said, "See all the kingdoms of the earth and the glory of them. To them I will give you if you will just bow down and worship me." Jesus refused that offer from Satan, but Satan didn't stop there. After Jesus walked away, Satan made that same offer to someone else. The prophet Daniel called him the little horn. Paul and John, the apostles and prophets of the Lord, called him the beast, the antichrist, the son of perdition. It's the papacy. No other institution in the history of mankind has ever ruled and reigned over the kings of the earth but the papacy. No institution, no single man, no group of men, no world of men has ever claimed the prerogative of God on earth, nor King of Kings and Lord of Lords. There's only one. That's the papacy. And the epitome of papal power came in the life and times of Gregory VII, who overthrew and unseated the Emperor Henry IV. And that's what we've been discussing. The establishment of the papal primacy. The establishment of papal primacy over the kings of the earth was established by Pope Gregory VII, Antichrist Pope Gregory VII, when he unseated Henry IV. Now, originally, the contention between Henry IV and the Pope was over the argument of Hungary. King Solomon had been overthrown by his brother, Gesa, and instead of appealing to the Pope, King Solomon appealed to the Emperor, Henry IV. And this was, well, more than the Pope could stand. If he was going to hold the title King of Kings, then Solomon should have come to Gregory VII for help in his quest to regain his crown of Hungary. But instead he went to Henry. Now, any contention between the Pope and Henry over the throne of Hungary would have led to possibly war, possibly embarrassment, possibly failure on the part of Gregory VII. So instead, Gregory VII took the issue of appointing bishops as the bone of contention between the Pope and the Emperor. Investiture, it's called. Investiture. Who has the power of appointing and seating and unseating bishops? Does it belong to the Pope, or does it belong to the Emperor? Well, the emperors for a long time enjoyed the power of investiture. And the papacy challenged Emperor Henry IV on that issue, knowing that he would succeed. And over the controversy of investiture, the Pope unseated Henry IV. And Henry was excommunicated by the Pope and he was abandoned by all of his country, by the empire. The Pope had won. Now, Emperor Henry IV could either pick up his books and go away, or he could go to Canossa on his knees and beg forgiveness of the Pope in hopes that the Pope would put him back on his throne. If he could somehow signify that he would submit to papal authority, then possibly he might regain his throne. So the Emperor Henry IV made a trip in the dead of winter over the Alps to grovel at the feet of the Antichrist. The Emperor, it says in the bottom of page 244, if you're following along, it says the Emperor was admitted, that is, to the castle of Canossa, where the Pope was holed up ready to meet him. The Emperor was admitted without his guard into the outer court of the castle, and 3 successive days remained from morning until evening in a woolen shirt and with naked feet. That is, he kicked off his shoes, acknowledging Gregory as his God. Remember the example of Moses? When Moses met the burning bush on the mountain, suddenly a voice was heard from the midst of the fire saying, "Take off thy shoes, for the ground upon which thou standest is holy ground." So Moses took off his shoes, didn't he, acknowledging the God of glory. Gregory did the same. Took off his shoes and stood in the snow barefooted. And the Pope allowed him to do this deference, this reverence, this groveling for 3 days before he let him into the castle. Now, at length, that is, after 3 days, after continuing for 3 days in the cold month of January, barefoot and fasting, the humbled emperor was admitted into the palace and was allowed the superlative honor of kissing the Pope's toe. That's right, when Henry was finally allowed into the castle, the Pope simply lifted his skirt and stuck out his foot, and Henry dutifully got down on his hands and knees and kissed his toe. Now, many commentators about this event will sympathize with Henry IV. I do not. I may be the only one who has ever talked about this subject who condemns Henry IV. He was a papist. He was an idolater, a groveling fool who submitted himself to the Antichrist. There's nothing honorable about Henry IV. He was not a righteous man. He was an idolater. He was a papist. He worshipped, served, and obeyed the Antichrist. He got into a controversy with the Pope, but he eventually kneeled before his feet and kissed his foot. Now, the author continues, he says, the haughty pontiff, he should have used the term the Antichrist of Scripture, History, and Prophecy, Pope Gregory VII, condescended to grant Henry IV absolution, forgiveness of his sin, but only upon condition of appearing on a certain day to learn the Pope's decision whether or not he should be restored to his kingdom, until which time the Pope forbade him to wear the ornaments or to exercise the functions of royalty. Okay? So that the very same thing that Henry did, not allowing the bishops of the Pope to wear their regalia, don the ring or the crozier, or exercise the office of bishop until they were consecrated by the king's court. That's exactly what the Pope did to him. Stripped him of his ornaments. Stripped him of his ensigns. This is turnabout is fair play, right? Intoxicated with his triumph, Gregory now regarded himself as Lord and Master of all the crowned heads of Christendom. What does that mean? King of Kings. Gregory VII, having forced Emperor Henry IV on his knees, on his face to kiss his toe, now became intoxicated by the power that he exerted over the most powerful king of the empire, the emperor himself. And this is how Gregory set the precedent that he is King of Kings. He'd conquered the biggest, the baddest, and the best, Henry IV. And so now the papacy has been elevated to King of Kings status in the world. It's a precedent that is still in force today. No one serves as king or potentate of a land. No president, no queen, no king serves unless they become vassals of the Holy Roman Pontiff. Now, this is the greatest secret known to mankind. And with this precedent set by Gregory VII over Emperor Henry IV, you have to comprehend that it does you no good whatsoever to go to the polls to vote for high political office. The papacy picks all the candidates. You have a choice, but that is to go and make a fool of yourself, to go and give a legitimate face to a completely illegitimate system and vote for either one of two papal picks, papal candidates, whether they be left or right. The Pope doesn't care which one you vote for as long as you vote for one of his candidates, and you have no other choice. All right? That's how this precedent is extended even to our day. It's the same all over the world. And anyone who unexpectedly takes power anywhere in the world without the Pope's approval, it's a government de facto. That means it's a government in fact, but it's not been handpicked by the Pope. And any government de facto is subject to overthrow at the convenience of the Pope whenever he chooses and however he chooses. And it's the governments and the militaries of the United States that exercise this papal prerogative around the world to overthrow and change the regime of de facto governments. Those governments, like that of Henry IV, which falls into disfavor by the papacy, is overthrown by military might if necessary. Economic sanction, threats, innuendo, by any means necessary, even if the taxpayers of the United States have to pay taxes so that the CIA can conduct operations to overthrow the government within that government. And this is what we see taking place in the Middle East today. Taxpayers of the United States, the dutiful papal proxy warriors, pay their taxes to send troops over into foreign conflicts to fight and to die to overthrow these unhappy de facto governments. And the taxpayers of the United States go to work every day, spend a good portion of their daily earnings to pay taxes to finance the CIA to launch internal dissent within that country, to raise up civil wars and assassins and whatever means necessary to overthrow these de facto governments. This is how the precedent set by Antichrist Pope Gregory VII is extended and practiced even in our day. Okay, and when President George W. Bush described this war in the Middle East as a crusade, he was telling the truth about it. It's a papal crusade. Okay? The United States of America used to be a Protestant country. What did they protest? The Antichrist, the papacy. Well, since futurism has become the main teaching of all the seminaries in the Protestant and evangelical churches, they now no longer believe the Pope is the Antichrist. They believe the Antichrist is a single individual that hasn't even come upon the world yet. It won't come until just 3.5 or 7 years before Christ returns. And so the deduction is that the Protestant Reformation was a grievous crime against the papacy, the legitimate throne of God on earth. And so now to make reparations to God, they must make reparations to the Pope and reestablish his authority in the world. The authority that he enjoyed during the life and times of Emperor Henry IV. Okay? King of Kings. That's what the Protestants have to pay for, to make reparations to the papacy. The papacy was overthrown of his King of Kings status during the time of the Protestant Reformation. It was the Protestant Reformation that unseated the Pope, denounced him as Antichrist, and launched a rebellion, a European rebellion against the authority and power of the papacy. And it's where we got our liberties, our right to speak, our right for a representative in court. All of our rights come from the Protestant Reformation. But we no longer believe in Protestantism because we believe in futurism. Our phony pastors behind the pulpits have sold us a lie. It's called futurism. It was a device of the papacy to shed the onus of Antichrist away from itself. To shed the onus of Antichrist onto a figment of the future. And thereby exonerating the popes, Gregory VII included. And so now the whole United States is Roman Catholic in its beliefs. They can profess to be Lutherans, Baptists, Presbyterians, Pentecostals, you name it. They can profess anything they want, but they are Roman Catholic in their belief. If they believe in futurism, that the Antichrist is yet future, and a single individual, they are Catholic in their belief. And this is the unity that now exists between the Protestant evangelical churches and the Roman Catholic Church, the synagogue of Satan. They are altogether wicked. They are altogether against God. They are altogether fighting for the cause of Antichrist. They've changed our whole society and made this society a servant of the papacy. They've devised the most sophisticated war-making material and equipment and devices of destruction that the world has ever seen. And it all serves the papacy. And it's all paid for by those who used to call themselves Protestants and evangelicals. You see how the precedent set that we're reading right here, right now? The example set by Antichrist, Pope Gregory VII, and the emperor, the European Emperor Henry IV. It still goes on today. Pope Gregory VII never dreamed of having this much power that the popes have today. Gregory VII would have been intoxicated had he been able to read, as did I, right here on Inquisition Update, the book by Francis Rooney, The Global Vatican. Henry VII, or rather Pope Gregory VII, would have been astonished to read Francis Rooney's book. His precedent has grown to a global monarchy. And that's what the papacy has intended ever since the beginning. That's what Satan intended it to be right from the very beginning. A kingdom equivalent to that of Christ. A kingdom that Christ rejected. See all the kingdoms of the earth and the glory of them all. To you I will give them if you will just bow down and worship me. Jesus wouldn't do it. Praise God. But there is one in the world that has, and only one. It's not a multiple choice question. When the question is asked, who took up the promise of Satan, there's only one answer. The papacy. Now, if somebody asks you tomorrow who is the Antichrist, you can tell them. Right? Will you tell them? Will you prove it? Will you convince them? Do you have the ability to convince them? Keep listening to Inquisition Update and you'll gain the ability. Keep listening to this author. Keep listening to all the authors that I read here on First Amendment Radio, and you'll be able to educate anybody and everybody that wants the information. So, Antichrist Pope Gregory VII overthrew the emperor. To the witness of all of Europe, and especially to the witness of God's holy people, God's literate, Bible-reading, Bible-believing, Bible-understanding people. And you know they read in the newspapers how Antichrist Pope Gregory VII overthrew the empire by overthrowing Henry IV and became, finally, King of Kings. Prophecy fulfilled. The little horn has grown to global status. No king rules without the approval of the papacy. It's a precedent that was set 1,000 years ago. Did you hear that? 1,000 years ago this precedent was set. And it's still the precedent of the world today. Now you can begin to understand why they taught you futurism. They've deceived you. And what are the consequences of their success in deceiving you? I'll let my listeners ponder that. And not just for a minute or two, or a day or two, or a month or two, or a year or two, but the rest of your life. Ponder the consequences of your pastor or your priester teaching you futurism. What is the consequence in your personal life? What is the consequence in your spiritual life? What is your consequence for the nation? What is the consequence for the entire world? The teaching futurism. That Antichrist is just a single individual that comes within 3.5 to 7 years before Christ's literal return. What is the consequence when the fact is, it has been, always will be, the papacy? Now, Henry IV has been, like all Roman Catholics, reduced to a vassal of the papacy. The emperor of all of Europe has been reduced to a toe-kissing swine. Okay? And now that the papacy has conquered Henry IV, made him a vassal, a toe-kissing, groveling swine, he's just delirious with his power. Intoxicated with his triumph, Gregory now regarded himself as Lord and Master of all the crowned heads of Christendom, and boasted in his letters that it was his duty to, quote, pull down the pride of kings, unquote. Matter of fact, his letters are still available. They're in Latin, but you can read them. And we're going to summarize some of those as we continue our reading. Now, subsection 10, again on page 244, we'll continue. It says, the pusillanimous conduct of the emperor, that is, the wimpified conduct of the emperor, the groveling vassal of the Pope, excited the indignation of a large number of the nobility and other subjects of the empire, and they would probably have deposed Henry in reality, if he had not softened their resentment by violating his promise to the imperious pontiff and immediately resuming the title and the ensigns of royalty. So, as soon as he was out of the presence of his God at Canossa, he decides to don his royal vestments, his scepter, and seat himself once again as king, an emperor. And this satisfied some in the empire who were ashamed of him for being reduced to a swiveling swine before the foot of the Pope. Now it says the princes of Lombardy especially could never forgive either the abject humility of Henry or the haughty insolence of Pope Gregory. A bloody war ensued between the domestic German enemies of Henry, headed by Rudolph, Duke of Swabia, whom, in consequence of the Pope's sentence of deposition, they had crowned as emperor at Mentz on the one side, and the Lombard princes, who, impelled by compassion for the humbled monarch and the indignation against the lordly Pope, had rallied round the emperor on the other. So it had divided the empire. There's going to be war over this. It says, as the result of this war appeared extremely doubtful for a time, Pope Gregory VII assumed an appearance of neutrality, affecting to be displeased that Rudolph had been consecrated as emperor without his order, and avowed his intention to acknowledging that one of the competitors who should be most submissive to the Holy See. So here we have the God of Rome seeing the empire torn in two over this situation, and the empire and the Pope, who was supposed to be God on earth, didn't know who was going to win this war. But he avowed that whoever of the two combatants in this war, whoever was most likely to be submissive to the Holy See, that's who the Pope was going to support. Does that sound godly to you? You know, the God of glory sees the future as though it had already happened. But the popes don't have that power. They have to wait until the cream comes to the top before they can skim it off. That's what makes him the Antichrist. He claims to be God on earth, but he can't demonstrate even the most basic powers of God. So here's the Pope, sees all the smoke and dust coming from the empire, and has to wait for the outcome to decide who he's going to support. Now, Henry had already learned too much of the character of Pope Gregory to place much dependence upon his generosity, and therefore with a renewed courage and energy he marched against his enemies and defeated them in several engagements, until Pope Gregory, seeing no hope of submission, thundered out a second sentence of excommunication against him, confirming at the same time the election of Rodolph, to whom he had sent a golden crown, on which the following well-known verse, equally haughty and puerile, was written. And it's in Latin, and I'll do my best. Petra didi Petro, Petrus diadem Rodolfo. The best I can do with that in Latin, since there's no English translation, is the prince of the apostle Peter, that is the Pope, sends the diadem to Rodolph. So the Pope's made his decision. He excommunicated Henry, and he has essentially put Rodolph on the throne. Now this donation, of course, everything is a donation from the Pope because the earth is the Pope's and the fullness thereof, right? So if you get a crown and authority in this world, you get it from the Pope. And it's a donation from the Pope. That's how the Pope sees it. That's how history records it. And that's how Bible prophecy prophesies it too. It says this donation was also accompanied with a prophetic anathema, that is a prophetic curse or damnation against Henry, so wild and extravagant as to make one doubt whether it was dictated by enthusiasm or whether by priestcraft. Now here's what his anathema to Henry said. After depriving him of his strength in combat, that's right, there are words to the effect that the God in Rome deprives the Emperor Henry IV of any power in combat, and condemning him never to be victorious. That's it. There's words in this anathema, in this damnation, that condemn Henry to never be victorious. Sounds like the voice of God, doesn't it? It concludes with the following remarkable apostrophe to St. Peter and St. Paul. This is St. Peter and St. Paul speaking now, according to the Pope. Here's what St. Peter and St. Paul told the Pope, quote, "Make all men sensible that as you can bind and loose everything in heaven, you can also upon earth take from or give to everyone according to his deserts, empires, kingdoms, principalities. Let the kings and the princes of the age then instantly feel your power, that they may not dare to despise the orders of your church. Let your justice be so speedily executed upon Henry that nobody may doubt but that he falls by your means and not by chance." Unquote. That's what the apostles St. Peter and St. Paul told the papacy. That's right. It's recorded in this damnation, this anathema against Henry. The popes always take advantage of their bogus claim that they are in direct contact with Christ, with God, with Peter and Paul and all the saints, and that St. Peter and St. Paul give the papacy instruction from heaven. And this is how the papacy represents St. Peter and St. Paul. St. Peter and St. Paul were said to the Pope, quote, "Make all men sensible that as only you can bind and loose everything in heaven, you also you also upon earth take from or give to everyone according to his deserts, empires, kingdoms, principalities. Let the kings and princes of the age then instantly feel your power, that they may not dare to despise the orders of your church. Let your justice be so speedily executed upon Henry that nobody may doubt but that he falls by your means and not by chance." Unquote. So what do you suppose the attitude of the popes are today? Now that this precedent was set 1,000 years ago, divine orders from heaven, from St. Peter and St. Paul, instructing the Pope and all their successors to make all men sensible that as you, the Pope, can bind and loose everything in heaven, you can also upon earth take from or give to everyone according to his deserts. That's everyone according to his deserts, empires, kingdoms, principalities. So, from where do the kings and emperors and principals of the earth get their thrones? From the popes. It says, let the kings and the princes of the age then instantly feel your power. Do you know the first phone call that is received by a newly elected president is the Pope? That's right. The Pope congratulates them for their election. You see, it's not an election at all. It's a circus. And you get to participate. Front row seat to the greatest show on earth. And then after the show's over, the Pope calls and congratulates the president. Wink and nod. All right? It goes off without a hitch. Everyone's proud of having conducted their patriotic duty in going to the polls. But the first phone call received by a newly elected president is usually either the Pope or his legate here in the United States of America, congratulating the new president for his victory in the election. More instruction from the King of Kings and Lord of Lords in heaven, St. Peter and St. Paul, say, let the kings and the princes of the age then instantly feel your power, that they may not dare to despise the orders of your church. Let your justice be so speedily executed upon Henry that nobody may doubt but that he falls by your means and not by chance. That was the instruction that Pope Gregory VII received from heaven regarding Henry IV. All of Europe knew that it was the Pope who unseated Henry. Not a sword, not anything else. It was the Pope's power that overthrew Henry. And listen, all the kings of the earth knew it. The Vatican made certain that all the kings of the earth knew why and how and by whom Henry fell. Now, let me just ask you a simple question. Who do you suppose is responsible for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy? Who's responsible for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln? Who's responsible for the assassination of every assassinated president in the history of this country? Are you having trouble with that one? If you are, you're not paying attention. Or you don't believe what this author is writing. But you can choose not to believe this. But you must believe the Bible. If you profess to be a Christian, and you believe the God of creation is the God of glory, the God and author of that book, who is infallible, who is divine, who is eternal and unchangeable, you must believe his Bible. It says, he reigneth over the kings of the earth. And now you know who he is, and who and how reigns over the kings of the earth. It's in your Bible. It's comprehended in history. It's predicted by the prophets. And it's a no-brainer. You think God would have us doubtful about such a sure and true thing? Do you think God plays fast and loose with the blood of the souls for whom His Son came and bled and died to redeem? God made it so perfectly evident who the Antichrist is in the world that it's a shame that any man, woman, or child throughout the history of the Christian age was ever in doubt about who it is. And there's no generation in the history of man that it was ever more in doubt about who the identity of the Antichrist is than our generation. And the blame goes to the pastors and the priesters of the churches. They are not Christian churches. They can preach Jesus till the cows come home, but if they leave us in jeopardy of not knowing who the Antichrist is, then they are no servant of Christ. They are no servant of Christ. They say that the 70th week of Daniel is yet future, when it was Jesus the Messiah who fulfilled perfectly and completely the 70th week of Daniel 2,000 years ago, thus making him the Messiah. You can't get it wrong. But they've all got it wrong. They've all got that single, basic, infallible truth wrong. Saying that the 70th week of Daniel is yet future. What are they saying when they say the 70th week of Daniel is yet future? They are saying that Jesus was not the Messiah. How can they serve Christ when they say Messiah has not yet come in the flesh? And do you know the Bible specifically says that he that denieth that Messiah has come in the flesh is the spirit of Antichrist. Futurism is the spirit of Antichrist. And futurism is a papal creation. The papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist. And if there is one thing that attests to that fact to this day, in our generation, who have been taught and believed lies all of our lives, is that the author of futurism is the papacy. The very man of sin, the very son of perdition, the very Antichrist, is the one who says that the 70th week of Daniel is yet future. That Antichrist has not come, and neither has Christ. Unless, of course, you wish to believe that the Pope is Christ. That's the whole strategy of Rome. And that has everything to do with the modern nation state of Israel and the rebuilding of a temple and the resumption of temple sacrifices and all, to make the Jews and the Protestants all eat and drink damnation to themselves. How is it that the Protestants of today are so anxious for the Jews to rebuild a temple, begin animal sacrifices, when continuing to do so after Christ became the sacrifice 2,000 years ago, just exactly as Daniel prophesied during the 70th and final week of his vision, to participate in those sacrifices, to long for them, to help pay for them, to sanction them, to support them, is the spirit of Antichrist. Are you beginning to comprehend just how confused and deceived nearly all of Christendom is today? That the whole world really is deceived? Just as the Bible predicts? Why hasn't your pastor ever read to you the history of this book, proving to you who the Antichrist is? Why hasn't your pastor long ago abandoned futurism and begun to teach the historical account, the historical rendering of Bible prophecy? When God prophesies a thing, it's to happen in the future. And when the future is the present, it becomes history. So the fulfillment of Bible prophecy is only found in history. And so when we read this historical account, we can see that the fulfillment of Bible prophecy has already taken place by the time of 1075 AD, when the little horn of Daniel becomes the Antichrist of Scripture, has risen to the power of King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and commands all of Europe. This is the time in history, recorded history, when the Pope had assumed the character of despot of the world. Universal monarch. When Emperor Henry IV got down on his hands and knees and kissed the bare-naked toe of the Antichrist of Rome, the papacy was victorious. Satan was victorious. See all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them all. To you I will give them if you will just bow down and worship me. King Henry IV bowed down and worshipped the Pope of Rome. And since that time, the papacy has ruled over the kings of the earth. You still looking for all these prophecies to be fulfilled in the future? Subsection 11. Before proceeding to relate a few other proofs of Pope Gregory's determination to reduce all the kingdoms of the world and their sovereigns under his absolute sway, we will dismiss the case of Henry by briefly relating the sequel of his remarkable life. With hopes of shielding himself from the effects of his second excommunication, the emperor assembled a council at Brixen in the Tyrol, which resolved that Hildebrand, Pope Gregory VII, by his misconduct and rebellion, had rendered himself unworthy of the pontifical throne, and elected in his stead Guibert, Archbishop of Ravenna, who assumed the name Clement III, and was at length consecrated at Rome, but it is not reckoned by Romanists in the line of popes. So Henry decides he's going to fire Antichrist Pope Gregory VII and elect a new pope in his place. And he succeeded for a time. He elevated the Archbishop of Ravenna, Guibert, to the title of pope. Okay? But the Roman Catholic Church doesn't recognize Guibert, Archbishop of Ravenna, and his papal name, Clement III. He's not listed among the popes, according to the Roman Catholic Church. But he was indeed consecrated at Rome. And now we've run out of time, and I'll tell you the rest of the story when we come back tomorrow, Lord willing. I hope and pray that my listeners have learned something, and if you haven't, I hope and pray you'll get this book and read it for yourself. Find the historical truth behind the papacy. The biblical, historical, and prophetic truth about the papacy is that he is the man of sin. I'll see you tomorrow.